Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another State Water Plan Task Force meeting. Today, we're going to focus on Lake Michigan and navigation. And I see that we have a number of other things that we have on our agenda this morning as well that we need to at least touch on and discuss a little bit. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. I did see BJ on. So apparently, do you still have your meeting or do you
Lauren,
need to step out early, or what's your plans there?
At 8:15, he canceled it for today, and now it's tomorrow. So I'm reshuffling all my meetings tomorrow. So yeah, I apologize. I knew that was, with his schedule likely, but yeah. So it is what it is. So it's been canceled.
You're right. That's the way that goes sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, do you have a preference on going first or second then, or are you able to be with us all morning?
I'm with you all morning, so I'll go second as planned. If that's all right.
That'd be great. All right. Unless Wes, are there any other housekeeping things we need to go to? Otherwise, I will get set to turn it over to Jim Casey, and we'll go through the Lake Michigan topics. And as before, I think we'll probably go through kind of the summary tables, but we're looking for feedback and or discussion from the State Water Plan Task Force as we cover these recommendations in each of these sections. So Wes, any other housekeeping things we need to take care of before we dive into Lake Michigan?
No, Lauren, I think we're good. I think we'll cover it all at the end with the review and some of those other things. So we'll hold it off till the end. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Well, with that then, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Casey out of the IDNR Lake Michigan programs and have Jim take us through the Lake Michigan draft chapter as it sits right now. Jim?
Hi, everyone. So Lake Michigan has a lot of issues that can be addressed in the state water plan, not the least of which is tourism, coastal resiliency, the diversion of water from Lake Michigan that's covered by a Supreme Court decree, the allocation of water to communities in the Lake Michigan service area, allocation fees, deteriorating water supply infrastructure and how to address it, water rates, water conservation and reuse, and offshore wind energy. So that's what we tried to address with our topics. So if we go to the table, item number 1 is the need for an understanding of the programs. So number 1 is improve public outreach and education related to water use and water conservation measures via Illinois Water Service Center. And that would be covered by the IDNR and would require additional personnel to be hired to implement that.
Jim, this is Lauren, I'll voice in here. This is, as we've talked about in a couple of our meetings already, this is kind of that cross-cutting, if you will, recommendations that we have in many of our topics. And of course, this one ties into the integrated water management and this idea of this Illinois kind of water service center and whether they would be kind of that central point for dissemination, say, of information about water conservation or something. So I think we had, in a previous meeting, we had decided that it probably was still a good idea to include these kinds of things in each individual topic as we go forward, but pointing out that there are some things like this that will likely be in each recommendation. All right, thank you, Jim.
Excellent. Any comments on that? Hearing none, move to number 2. Number 2 is the department's attempt to improve its annual water allocation reporting form. Every community or industry that has a Lake Michigan water allocation must submit an annual audit form. Back in 2015, we started including the AWWA free audit software with our LMO2 form, and since then it's proven to be very onerous on the communities to fill out every year. They have an extreme hard time, if you will, filling it out, and it's taking a lot of man hours in our department to walk everyone through it. So we're attempting in the near future to revise that form to make it simpler for the communities and the department to collect the annual data. So that would require an administrative rule change of our Part 3730 rules.
Jim, this is Greg Good with Illinois EPA. What's IEPA's role in this? You got
I'm not sure, Greg.
That's a good, honest answer. I like that.
Yeah.
Good morning, Jim. This is Yukon Forestry from Water Resource Center. And in the end of this role, the climate change is unchecked. What does that mean? I mean, when those three columns in yellow check, what do they mean? Could you elaborate a little bit? Thank you.
I'll start with that, maybe Wes.
Well, I mean, like social justice, it's we would prefer to have a form that the community can fill out easily on its own. The new version we have now is proving complicated for communities with say small engineering staffs where their water department is really, they don't really have an engineer. They have more, it's just more guys that are more worried about just fixing leaks in pipes. So social justice, those are your poorer towns, but even the more wealthier towns have a hard time with the form. So that would help that. Environmental justice, it's the same thing. It's just making it easier for somebody to fill out the form without having to go and hire a consultant.
Hey, Jim, I can jump in here for a second, and just for a clarification for everybody, I'm going to share my screen here, Tara, if you don't mind, and just as a reminder, this was kind of the template we had set up for the table. So we discussed in prior meetings about whether or not to have that those additional columns, and ultimately we decide not to have those. So just a reminder, we'll probably have those pulled off just for consistency for all the sections. We won't have those 3 columns at the end. And then this is also the standard answers we have for the last 3 columns. What state agency, the funding, we're just going to simplify it, and then the action would be one of these on the list. Again, just to have a consistent looking report. That was something that we discussed in a prior meeting. So just wanted to remind everybody that we'll try and have all the recommendation tables kind of fit this formatting just for consistency throughout the report. That's all I had. Thanks.
Okay. Number 3, update the department's Part 3730 administrative rules to reflect a new trend-based approach to regulating water water allocation permittees conservation efforts related to water loss. So Part 3730 rules are the ones we use to allocate water from Lake Michigan. Currently, we base conservation efforts on a percentage of water loss to water purchased. It's called non-revenue water. Currently, that maximum limit's at 10%. Upon doing more research on that, it's become apparent that there are better ways to track a community's progress as it comes to water conservation and lessening their water loss. So we hope in the next few years to look into that, and then but that would require us to change our rules if we change the way we regulate our permittees.
This is Tara. I actually had a question on number 2 before we go too far into number 3. In terms of when you develop this new form to go for the reporting use, you need funding to get that form or some staff to develop that form? Because I noticed the funding's empty. So the actual work required to do number 2, would there be something needed for that?
Yeah, it may, because we would want to, we want to make it more user friendly. So we probably, hopefully, ideally, we'd like to set up something where they enter it online, and then if they don't enter certain fields, it would bounce back at them. So staff isn't constantly looking at incomplete reports and then just wasting time, and then getting back to having to respond and say, hey, you forgot to fill this out. So yeah, I would imagine, unless we can do it, I don't imagine us seeing us doing it in-house, so we'd probably have to either hire a consultant or possibly go to, ask for help from the State Water Survey or something like that.
Yeah, so my next question is, I think we would have to put some sort of funding in maybe a one-time funding. And I noticed, we're all developing these topic tables, and we struggle a little bit with how specific to make them and how vague to make them without limiting us in the future. But just to remind everyone in the call, one way to look at this is what can be measured in 5 years. So when you maybe add to number 2, just indicate perhaps that you're going to develop an online form and just be a little bit more specific, so at the end of 5 years we could say, yes, you developed this online tool, you're done with this task, now we can move on to other things in the next 5 years. And then my second part of my question was, I know, how does this tie into water sustainability? Wes presented that about a month ago, and he was talking about measurement difference for measuring water allocation. So I was just curious if these tied together at all with Wes, and this is just water allocation for Lake Michigan. Is it something that Wes would want to include with his topic as well, this same form?
I can address that real quick, Tara. I think our recommendation focused on irrigation. As groundwater irrigation systems typically don't have monitoring on those water use. I believe it's already a requirement for everything in Lake Michigan to meter their water use. So I'd defer to Jim on that, but I see these being 2 separate issues, as we don't want to put as strict of requirements for all of Illinois for what Lake Michigan has to do.
Yeah, you have to remember that the Lake Michigan diversion is capped at 3,200 CFS on a 40-year average by a Supreme Court decree. that there really would not be an opportunity to go back to the Supreme Court and get that increase if we ever violated it. The other Great Lakes states would fight it tooth and nail. So for us, for our area, water conservation is a huge topic, and that's why we, make all our permittees submit annual and some of them submit monthly forms on top of it.
Okay, thank you. I'm done with number 2.
I'm sorry, this is Greg Good with number 2. If we don't know why Illinois EPA is on there, I just as soon take it off as a lead agency.
I'm not sure how they got there, so we can. I mean, IEPA really doesn't. I think IEPA was. I mean, we're talking with IEPA about funding for, disadvantaged communities for water system improvements, but I'm not sure that belongs in number 2.
I think, yeah, Jim, I think you hit it correct there. I think the reason that IEPA was there was more from not so much the water use reporting, but that reporting included the water loss. And so it was more related to water loss information that would be then reported to IEPA as Jim said, as we've started some discussions about, can we utilize that to help improve the IEPA program in terms of prioritizing revolving fund issues based on those cases where water loss is the most extreme. I think that's why that was included on number 2.
Okay.
What do you think, Greg? Is that still?
Well, as long as I guess somebody can explain that when the report gets developed and they say, well, why is IEPA on here? That's all. I mean, I don't know, so that's just why, and neither one of us could say why. So that's a good explanation. But as long as somebody can explain that, if it ever gets questioned.
Yeah, Greg, I think we can claim that one as part of water loss strategies for small water systems. We do have some things of it out there for that.
Okay. And then Wes, real quick, you showed the table about actions and funding, what the consistent pick list. I didn't catch on the actions. We had program, policy, legislation, study, and there's one other one I didn't quite get to.
It was project was the 5th and final one.
And then I noted under funding we had an unknown. Is there an action that do we want unknown under action as well? And the only reason I asked that is because I was looking ahead of schedule here on some of Jim's, and he had to be determined things. Should we use an unknown category for that, or?
Well,
or no? Just throwing
I guess we could talk about once we get there. I'm not exactly sure. I think under his column he has lead agency, funding, and legislation instead of action. So I think that would need to be changed to action. I don't know if we would need an unknown for an action. I usually would fall under some kind of without action, what's it doing in the plan, I guess, would be my question. So I guess we can see if that would come up. I'd hesitate to say that with funding, sometimes we need to work through the process to see if funding is necessary. But in action, I would think that would usually fall under a specific category on what steps we're going to take to implement the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and also on number 2, I guess the reason that was blank there was mostly because that's a programmatic effort within DNR, the reporting and the collection of that data, and this is actually, improving it. So later down, I think in number 5, we get into how we might generate some additional revenue for these programs that addresses funding, but I didn't think that it would need new funding here necessarily when we're trying to simplify and improve. If we're making it more complicated, I guess you could argue that we need more staff, but that's why I guess I left that open for debate because we're improving a program. And so do we need funding to improve an existing program? If we, in this case, for example, in DNR, within the program, we have staffing set up to cover that program. Do we have that staffing? Not completely, but we're not needing to establish new job descriptions or anything. It's already covered there.
Yeah, Lauren, I'm trying to think of how we discussed this prior when we laid out the funding columns, but I thought it was my understanding that if we wanted additional funding, we would list that as additional annual funding, say if you need additional staff or if you had a reoccurring contract with a consultant or something along those lines. If it was being covered under or could be covered with existing resources, I thought that's when we were stating none, but that may have also been whenever we had something like a legislative action that doesn't require funding, so to speak, to implement.
So that one could maybe be like no new funding or something. I mean, we need to fund the positions that it requires to carry out that program, but we're not like trying to implement a new program that would require brand new funding.
Well, in that case, you could also just list as annual funding is that you need to continue to obtain annual funding to see that through.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I thought that looking at this, to develop that online portal, you might have to hire a consultant. So that would be a one-time funding to develop that portal. And then once that portal's done, you use your existing staff to run it.
Possibly, yeah. We'll give that some more thought and come back to that one.
All right, moving on to number 3. Again, update our Part 3730 rules to reflect the new trend based on approach to regulating a water allocation permittees conservation effort related to water loss. Currently we use, as I said before, a percentage of water loss to water bought to regulate water loss with their permittees. It's currently based at 10%. In looking at it and reading other material on the issue, it's come to our attention that it might be better to, instead of giving a flat number for all communities, it may be better to judge each community on a trend basis over time. So, but if we do that, they would require a rule change. So that's what we're hoping to look at in the next year or two. Any questions? Hearing none. Number 4, expand IDNR water resources Lake Michigan programs to work with under-resourced and disadvantaged communities to assist them with their water supply system improvement plans and conservation members and funding for those plans. This would require additional personnel, services, and currently we have myself and 2 other people in the Lake Michigan section. The workload is doesn't allow us to look into helping communities with obtaining grants and things for water system improvement projects. We could literally use one, an additional person just to do that. So that's the thought, that we expand the program, hire additional personnel, and some of that personnel would be, their only job would be to assist communities in getting funding for water, like water main replacement projects, that kind of thing. That would not require a rule change.
I have a question for Lauren then. As part of the Water Center, you also had the outreach group. I'm forgetting the names right now. Yeah, there were 2 facets. The hub was just to remind the group, the hub was to be a library of sorts and maintain all the information water related for the state from many different agencies. And then you had a second facet of your recommendation that was related to the outreach and developing materials and sharing those resources amongst the agencies. And I forgot what you called it, but does that sort of fall under this type of task?
Well, this is probably more specific to this program, because it's specific to that water and their use and the need to improve that infrastructure. And so since it was so program specific, I saw this being handled within that particular program, not necessarily something that like a water center would cover there. I mean, that's where we go back to that discussion of, as we provide that information, as pulling in EPA, is that person working with EPA in that program to say, well, yeah, Community X has, they've got 47% water loss, and most of it's coming from, this northeast corner of the community where the system is 95 years old. Can we, and then working with the community to kind of be that tie with EPA, or can we get revolving funds or other grant funds to focus on that, say, northeast corner of town where the leakage is so bad? And so, but it ties back then to that program trying to drop the water loss amounts in that community as part of their allocation. So it does, you're right that it does kind of tie together, but I saw this as a program specific need and improvement there.
Oh, Lauren, I may have misspoke. There's the Water Center, which is the hub, but then when you did your integrated management talk, you have as item 3 to reestablish staff and fund the local assistance program in the IDNR Office of Water Resources. And I was thinking that was exactly what he's suggesting, that you have staff, and it was called additional personnel services to go out into the communities and do outreach and work as a local assistance program. So I think it's fine to put it in this section, but I'm just suggesting we tie it back to your recommendation and just say that this would go through the new local or the newly recommended local assistance program.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that could, as we do local assistance in northeastern Illinois, and that becomes an identified need, then yeah, that all ties together, I guess.
Okay, number 5. Implement water allocation review fees to assist communities with the program reporting, water conservation measures, water system improvement plan implementation, and or water system improvement plan management. Recently, we've been asked to look into charging fees for water allocation permits. It would be an annual fee based on water use. There would be categories, you know, like under 100,000 gallons per day, you know, 100,000 gallons to 1,000,000 gallons per day, you know, and so forth. They would be capped at $5,000 and would be graduated, so communities using less water would pay less than communities using more water. It was thought that the funding could be used to staff, to pay for additional staff in the water in the Lake Michigan section, and that additional, any money left over could be offered as grants to communities for water improvement projects. So that would be self-funding, and again, it would need a rule change also.
Hey, Jim, has there been any feedback from the locals on this? I'm just curious if there's been a big kickback or if there.
I don't think we didn't. This is strictly internal. I don't doubt there'd be a kickback, but it hasn't gone that far yet. It was.
Okay, I'm trying to read. I know when the other OWR permitting went through with the fees and stuff, I don't recall what the reaction was. I know some considered it positive and that getting more assistance and more staff was worth the investment for the community. So I could see that potentially being the case here as well. I was just curious. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, this is Lauren. I guess a general comment that I make, you know, the water plan in a way can be a Trojan horse in that, you know, here we introduce this concept to the General Assembly and to the, you know, to the administration as a recommendation, and it comes in then with kind of the support of the State Water Plan Task Force as we introduce something like this, and it puts a spotlight on it kind of in a soft manner. So rather than one agency coming in and saying, hey, we're gonna go get money from these people for this purpose and do this, just coming out of the cold, a concept like this gets introduced in a state water plan, and so then you the people in power, the legislatures get to see that as a recommendation, as a concept, and then when we follow it up with, say, actual legislation or rule changes, then we're merely implementing this recommendation out of the submitted water plan. So that's true across the board as we make these recommendations. So that's why I say, in a way, it becomes almost like a Trojan horse where we can get these things in the spotlight in a soft way. Thank you.
Okay, number 6, establish and lead a Lake Michigan water diversion users work group that focuses on the Illinois Lake Michigan Water Allocation Program and common concerns and needs. I don't know, Warren, you want to talk to this one?
Yeah, sure. This kind of follows up as we look to make these improvements like we had, up in number 2, or as we're trying to simplify some of these things. But this was really, we need the communities in northeastern Illinois that are on Lake Michigan water to think of themselves as a family. And so that, whoever the most troublesome sibling in the family is, well, that hurts the whole family. And so that's where we need that family of communities to be looking at themselves as a family of users. And, an improvement to one is an improvement to all, or a detriment to one becomes really a detriment to all. So if we had a community who just let their water supply system go to pot, and we had such extreme loss, well, that's water that the rest of the groups don't have access to and use. So this was really an effort or a recommendation to help support this idea of the water users, gathering and having a work group that understands that and knows what the issues are and looks at it regionally on their Lake Michigan water use, as opposed to thinking of it just from their own community's perspective. Thank you.
Number 7, partner with the Great Lakes Commission, NOAA, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to explore additional means to enhance coastal resiliency with a focus on regional high lake level protection. Last year, when we had record high lake levels on Lake Michigan, a lot of communities were caught off guard, and you had public beaches disappearing. You had infrastructure that was built close on land, but close to the lake, getting flooded or destroyed by wave action. So I guess this would just be a way of addressing that and not being having a plan for it in the future.
And this is kind of in the works. Since we'd first developed this recommendation, the president actually put funding in the Corps' budget for the Chicago Corps to begin a resiliency study. So this one is actually kind of underway as we speak. And so we'd be working with the various Great Lakes coastal programs and the Corps of Engineers to deal with shoreline resiliency, coastal resiliency, again, kind of regionally. As Jim said, with those high lake levels, we had a number of properties that sustained damage. And so rather than look at it on a kind of a property by property approach, and the property owners obviously are doing that, and we're dealing with that from some of our permitting perspective as they come in for permits for their own bank line stabilization or other breakwater kind of projects. This is saying, hey, we the state need to engage with these other federal partners and other states to be looking at what are we doing in Lake Michigan to address this in a regional manner and provide some consistency. So that's what this is really recommending, that we stay plugged in this effort. Thank you.
Okay, number 8. This goes towards tourism. Work with Illinois port communities to support increase and promote sustainable coastal tourism and recreational opportunities, including Great Lakes cruises, cruise line industry, access to Illinois ports. it's pretty self-explanatory. Just promoting tourism through the cruise industry and the Great Lakes in the Chicagoland area.
And Jim, if I can add in on this one a little bit too, and Yufeng may have some he could enter in as well, but the Great Lakes Commission, you know, they're looking specifically at ports and port communities in the Great Lakes in order to you know increase and improve economies there, and so it's kind of plugging in there. But really, what's you know developed here since particularly since the last state water plan is this that the cruise industry has focused in on the Great Lakes as a key market, and so there are a number of cruise lines that are beginning to run cruises of the Great Lakes, and Illinois needs to be posed to take economic advantage of that. You know, and so are we going to be able to allow these cruise ships to port at say Navy Pier, or are we going to you know, would there be other communities along our coastline that would need to facilitate the docking of these cruise ships? Of course, they're not, you know, they're not the same size as might cruise in the Caribbean, but they're still fairly good sized ships that could dock and improve a local community's economy. So that's why that's kind of plugged in and saying, well, we need to continue to work with DCEO and others to facilitate the ability to accommodate that growing industry on the Great Lakes. Thank you.
Okay, number 9. Promote increased maritime transportation of commercial goods between the Great Lakes ports and other national and international ports via the Chicago area waterway and Gulf of Mexico by improving economic viability and capacity of Illinois' Lake Michigan coastal ports, harbors, and marinas. And that would be IDOT, and yes, it would require additional funding.
I have a question on number 8. Sorry to go backwards again, but with the DCEO, I don't know if they've been involved with the state water plan. So if they're the lead agency, do we need to get support from them, or has there been conversation so they're aware of this recommendation that they would be taking the lead for?
The short answer is yes. They're aware of it, and do they need to be reminded that it's in the water plan? Probably, but they're already on that track for that purpose.
Thanks.
Okay, number 10. Protect, enhance, and restore important coastal habitats with an emphasis on public-owned and accessible land and wetlands hydrologically connected to Lake Michigan. I guess the biggest natural habitat on Illinois' coast is Illinois Beach State Park. There currently is a large project running through the permitting process to restore and protect a good portion of Illinois Beach State Park with offshore breakwaters and shore attached breakwaters. Number 11, support viability of Lake Michigan-based offshore wind and/or wave green energy by defining acceptable and unacceptable zones for potential turbine construction that would abide by the public trust doctrine. When you want to talk to that one, please.
Yeah, sure. And there's already was existing legislation out there, and there's supposed to be an offshore wind energy commission, I think, that's chaired by the DCEO. I'm not sure that kind of got charged to them about the time that COVID hit, so I'm not sure that they've moved very, very far, very fast on that. But again, this is something where the IDNR did kind of step forward, and we are working on developing mapping, if you will, kind of a like a red, yellow, green mapping of the Great Lakes, or at least of Lake Michigan, the Illinois boundaries of Lake Michigan, to define those areas where we absolutely would not accept offshore wind energy turbines, where we might think about doing it, and where we could accept construction of offshore wind energy. So this is basically building off of some of the work that's already underway to say, well, we as a state can certainly identify where we would or would not allow that type of energy within the boundaries of Illinois as we look at Lake Michigan. Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you, Jim. Appreciate you taking the time. Does anybody have any overall questions or comments as it pertains to the Lake Michigan section? Kind of open it up for some just general discussion or comments.
This is Greg Good at Illinois EPA. I'm not sure if what I'm about to say should be included in any way, shape, or form as a recommendation, but just know that our agency, through our staff in our Des Plaines Regional Office, has an active Lake Michigan monitoring program. We collect 25 rounds of sampling, if you will, for all kinds of different parameters within a 5-kilometer reach of the 63 miles of shoreline of Lake Michigan. We also try to get close to the cribs to kind of monitor a public water supply component, if you will. And then we also do the harbors, about 3 harbors per year. So we get around looking at all the harbors every 3 or 4 years. We get out there, we try to get out there as best we can 3 times per year. Waves, a lot of times wave action prohibits our getting out there. At the same time, we're looking for harmful algal blooms, even though we don't think we'll see them there. Either did other states, or either did the Ohio or Sanko on the Ohio River, and we're starting to see them once in a while on the Mississippi River as well. So I guess just know that we have an active Lake Michigan water quality monitoring program that annually takes place. I don't know that we need a recommendation to continue because we are, or enhance or anything like that. But if you didn't know that we did that, I guess now you do. So.
Is there a need for a change to that program, or something that we should highlight of that program?
Yeah, that's what I guess I'm just maybe giving it just out as basic knowledge. We started that program about 10 years ago. We have a 26-foot boat that we take out there. It's just part of our routine water quality monitoring. We do inland lakes, we do streams, and we do Lake Michigan. And when I say we do that, we look at, nutrients, suspended solids, different kinds of organics and metals, and mostly in the water, sometimes in the sediment. harmful algal blooms has been in the last, 4 or 5 years, I guess we've been looking and really haven't ever had a hit out there. So, yeah, I don't know that, again, I'm not sure that there's any recommendation here unless somebody would think of one from a water quality perspective, but, or in-lake water quality perspective. Just throwing it out so that everybody, I guess, knows that it exists. And if somebody had a light bulb go up over their head right now, hey, we really need this parameter, or we need it more frequently, or I guess just know that we do that for now.
Okay, so
Because
the
I've learned
light bulb,
I've learned an awful lot of stuff all of a sudden about allocation here, which is great because I never really put my toes into that stuff before. So, and many of you probably didn't even know we had a Lake Michigan monitoring program. So, just an FYI, if nothing else.
okay, so the light bulb did go off on my head, Greg, when you said that. So, going back to like the resiliency, the coastal resiliency recommendation and that type of work, I guess what I'm hearing is that we don't, DNR does not have, at least Water Resources, Lake Michigan program doesn't have a 26-foot boat to go out and do some of that monitoring of the shoreline for, evaluating coastal resiliency, or even, looking for potential regulatory violations, or some of those kinds of activities. I'm wondering if there couldn't be some, again, like interagency collaboration there, where we make even more use of that vessel to accomplish more programmatic needs.
Well, if not this particular vessel, maybe some other new vessel or I think I'd like to do that on one of those cruise ships, actually. And actually, I did in one of my senior magazines. Did see one of those cruise line things that hit hit at least 5 Great Lakes. So interesting that came up today.
Yeah, I have had several meetings with one cruise line that's very interested in going to Chicago, like right off the Navy Pier. So
yeah.
Yeah, I've actually thought of putting in for Great Lakes Restoration Initiative dollars for a larger research vessel for the state of Illinois that covers, again, would cover some of that water quality work for EPA, some of the work that DNR does in terms of, the aquatic species monitoring and some of that, and of course, the work that we need for coastal resilience. So I actually debated about putting that in as a recommendation here in this section about securing a new vessel. I think the state of Illinois, at least DNR, had a vessel or utilized a vessel, but I believe that vessel is like 80 years old this year. So its reliability is questionable. And so I had debated about putting in a recommendation in the Lake Michigan section for a new vessel, a large vessel for the state of Illinois. I don't know if this might be the best section, I guess, to include that. What do folks think about putting that in? Because to me, there was a need for a significant sized vessel that could handle Great Lakes conditions that would be served by several agencies as necessary.
Yeah, because don't you also have DNR fisheries biologists that have vessels that go out and collect fish samples, and we do water quality. We got this resiliency thing now. They have that big vessel called the Guardian, right? That goes to all the different all the different Great Lakes on a periodic basis, and that's strictly that's a big boat. I forget how big that thing is, but that's purely a research vessel. So, yeah, you would think that some larger, bigger vessel like that for Lake Michigan kind of monitoring. There's all kinds of people that can do monitoring, State Water Survey, be Natural History Survey, could do stuff, DNR, IEPA. Might be a cool thing to have, but probably would take a lot more planning than maybe what, as far as what a recommendation should really look like. I don't know. Interesting thought, though, just to have an Illinois larger vessel for Lake Michigan monitoring. Would Great Lakes Restoration Initiative get you? I think they're kind of limited at about 300,000, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm
Per
not.
application.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, I think could get more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about even like trying to purchase a used Coast Guard vessel or something. That. Well, I'll get with Jim and we'll give that some thought and see whether we want to include that as an additional recommendation to explore the potential purchase of a vessel for the state of Illinois that would be used by several different programs across the state.
Okay, any other comments or questions regarding Lake Michigan? I'll just pause a moment, see if anybody has any. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the navigation section. So, Tara, if you could pull up the navigation section, and I will turn it over to BJ Murray to discuss navigation. Go ahead, BJ.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So I tried to keep this pretty high level, and certainly I'm not an expert on some of these issues and some of the different agencies and some of the programs. So please throw out any recommendations you've got to me. I did keep it more at the commercial navigation level, although that still would cover a lot of the recreational vessel issues. I did not include the auto ferries that the department either owns and operates or provides financial assistance to. So I didn't include those, but if somebody thinks that those should be included, I certainly can add them. I know I wanted to touch base a little bit. I know you talked about the cruise lines. I have heard that both American Cruise Line and Viking are considering having cruise trips up and down the Mississippi River in the fairly near future. So that may have some impact as well. But anyway, so again, I did try to keep it at a high level. If we go to the issues and recommendations, as Wes said, just disregard the last three columns, and we'll get rid of those, and then maybe adjust the legislation language to better fit into his format. So hopefully everybody got a chance to read this. I don't want to cover a bunch of stuff that's already been read. But anyway, so infrastructure, obviously with navigation, high water level, low water levels, crumbling infrastructure all have significant impacts on the ability to navigate both the Illinois and all of our river systems. And so much of this is, in my opinion, is based on funding and available funding. And however, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for at least the navigation and dredging. And so I put them down in a lot of the lead agencies. I don't know whether that was appropriate or not, if we were trying to stick to what state agency or if we were to list federal agencies as well. But anyway, so for the first one is kind of the overarching infrastructure recommendation of more consistent and additional funding, both annual federal appropriations. And I put down the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as the lead agency. Lauren, Wes, is that appropriate, or are we trying to really identify lead state agencies?
BJ, I'll just start with go ahead, Lauren.
I was just going to say, to me, it is a state plan, so it would maybe be, which state agency would collaborate with the federal agency or be that point.
Okay. With that, do you think that would be IDNR, or do you think, I mean, we have gotten obviously more involved, but we don't really directly discuss with the Corps on locks and dams and those type of things. So, any thoughts there? Am I losing
I'm
you
just
guys?
very Lauren on this.
I'm fine putting DNR there.
And I can certainly put both IDNR and IDOT, whatever you think, but
Yeah, probably put both. That sounds better.
because there are some things as we move down that are more IDOT centric, and some are going to be more IDNR centric. So as far as the ports, I think everybody is aware that as part of the Rebuild Illinois, we did have basically $150 million port facilities capital investment grant program. That is only really a one-time stimulus type program. We were instructed to do a 3 to 5 year program, which we are about in probably the next couple of weeks announce the award recipients for those funds. So I did list IDOT, and I listed DCO because they're going to partner with us on that, as well as IDNR. And as far as funding, again, that's a one-time stimulus type program, and in order to continue to assist ports and waterways, I felt that they reestablished. Well, there was a state revolving fund program that has not been utilized in some time, probably 20 years or more. Certainly, that could be reestablished to help provide funding for port districts, as well as continued funding capital programs such as the grant program that I just mentioned. So under legislation, I put yes to establish and fund. And again, if anybody has any comments, just don't hesitate and jump out and tell me I'm wrong and need to change it. So, oops. Cancel another phone. Okay. So then I moved into more specific locks and dams. Again, I had U.S. Army Corps of Engineer, but I'll change that to probably IDNR and maybe IDOT. I don't know. So again, it's all about funding and aging of infrastructure. I think we all know that a lot of the locks and dams are reaching 100 years of age, and certainly need significant improvements and replacements. And I will say that obviously the Corps has more recently provided a lot of funding and have done some scheduled repairs. So they are doing what they can with the amount of funds that they have been allocated. Although we need obviously more funds to be allocated in order to really make a difference in the system. I think Lauren, you had mentioned earlier about kind of the weak links. With navigation, all it takes is one lock and dam to fail and really completely stymie the entire system. So we need to not only replace one lock, we need to rehabilitate probably 15 lock and dam within the state of Illinois. And then I'm sorry, somebody have a question? Okay. So then I went to bridges. Probably everybody has started to hear more about container on barge, container on vessel. Although that hasn't been the panacea that we maybe hoped for, there is still additional talks and still discussions of even creating I think it's American Patriot Holdings is creating a vessel to be strictly for container on barge operations. I do think it will come. It's an opportunity to move goods and services that typically don't move in an open or even open barge. And so I think we will see that in the future. And with that, obviously, then that brings into issues with height restrictions for bridges. And so that I listed IDOT as well as FHWA and even Federal Railroad Administration, because there are obviously some rail crossings as well over the waterways. And so let's see, I've got the funding as a state funding to repair and replace antiquated bridges, and this would probably be done, as needed. There isn't any really great funding source for those bridges to be raised at this time. So as they become antiquated and there is programs and funding for those uh, bridge structures, it should certainly be looked at to possibly raise those to a higher level. Any questions on that one? It's all got quiet on me. Wes, you do hear me, right?
Oh yeah, we got you, BJ. You must just be doing a good job explaining these that nobody has any questions or comments.
So I thought maybe.
This is Lauren. I guess I have a general question, or so as IDOT continues to develop the marine transportation, I don't know if that'll be a section or a division or how that's going to fall within your agency there. Is there a need to highlight or to have a recommendation on its development of what that section or division ultimately will become? I guess, where is IDOT in that process? I know you've kind of been tagged in that kind of a leadership position to help make that happen. As I go back on the ones we've talked about already, where we kind of have an IDNR, IDOT tag team there, some of that because it was DNR once upon a time when we were IDOT, and now IDOT. Is there something that the water plan should lift up about the creation of that new section or the programs?
Well, certainly the establishment of a section, and as you know, we did do the recent Illinois Marine Transportation System Plan that had programmatic recommendations, and obviously one of those was to establish a actual section. You mentioned that I'm kind of really in a volunteer position, and so there needs to be some more solidification of staffing and roles and responsibilities within IDOT, and whether that is a recommendation in this plan or not, but certainly that's something that needs to happen. Right now, when some of these issues come about, it's really a guessing game trying to figure out who within IDOT even has knowledge or responsibility with a lot of these different issues. And for example, the ferries, there's about 6 different people who have different fingers into the funding and knowledge of these different operations. And it would be nice to maybe have a centralized marine transportation system staff who dealt with these issues more on a daily basis. But right now, all I've gotten is really permission to post a single marine person position. There has been some talk of maybe moving this under the freight group. So I guess that remains to be seen. So, so no, if you're saying that we should put a recommendation for staff or section, certainly I think that might be appropriate.
I think so. I think at least, yeah, like Tara's got here, establish the IDOT Marine Transportation program, and perhaps it's just the recommendation could even be to explore the creation and of that section, which then gives that flexibility, like you say, if it goes into the freight group or something that's already established and adds, adds more responsibilities within their section. But I think the water plan would be the right place to lift that up. Maybe you're even kind of copying and pasting some of the recommendations out of the marine transportation plan, or as recommended in the marine transportation plan, recommend that we, explore the further development and creation of this section.
Okay.
Something to that nature, I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, that sounds good. I guess I just didn't want to put too much in there, stuff that serves my my benefit. But if you think it's appropriate, certainly we could add that. So, okay, and then I guess moving on
I did
to
have a quick comment.
sure.
Sorry, I know it makes sense based on what you and Lauren are saying that DOT and DNR have that relationship from being one in the past. But in general, when we put a lead agency, we were trying to just do one. And that person may include work from other agencies, but technically they're the lead agency who would eventually have to report on this particular recommendation. So I just am bringing that forward. I think it's fine to do IDNR and DOT when that makes sense, but technically we need to have one person establish the lead agency, and that's why it's called lead agency. So when you go back to revise these, you might decide who ultimately is responsible. Again, I think IDNR DOT is okay for these types, but we might need to take out some of these alternative lead agencies. But I'm just
Sure.
throwing that out there to the group.
Right. No, I understand. And so yeah, so like, well, when I get down to like maintenance dredging, where I actually put in 4, I'll obviously take those out and do as you requested there. So, thank you. So for technological improvements, there's a whole host of things that are coming online as far as navigation with, electronic buoys and AIS and other things that are coming out to assist all users of the waterways. So I put in there the Army Corps, but right, since they're not a state agency, however, they are I guess the top tier agency of the navigation. Any ideas as to the lead agency for something like that? And just, really we're just looking to maintain adequate width and depth and then pursue additional funding. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped down, sorry. But anyway, so making use of technological advancements, certainly I could put IDOT. What do you think on that, Wes and Lauren or Tara?
I guess in my mind,
I just added coordinate with, because as the DOT would be coordinating with, we could put in here, coordinate with US Corps and making sure and finding out what they're doing. But I'm open to other suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these would be undertaken by private, individuals. Not all boats have the ability to, for AIS and other, and the utilization of electronic buoys and stuff like that. So I think that's somewhat up to the individual user to embrace and fund those type of equipments that are going to assist them in the navigation of the system.
Yeah, in my mind, particularly anything that says reports, I think should be IDOT. And I guess
Okay.
I would start with recommendation number one being the establishment, or what we were just talking about, explore the establishment of that section. And then IDOT, kind of serve as that lead, on some of these, it might even end up being, say, the Illinois delegation of the Great Lakes Commission that works with, the commission and maybe US EPA and others to get funding that might accomplish some of this. But I think we still need some point state agency that, like you say, is reporting out or tracking those efforts. So in my mind, a lot of that would be IDOT. I guess I'm still good with the ones where we're talking about the locks and dams and some of that could perhaps remain IDNR.
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I guess I was struggled writing this and preparing it as to what we actually were looking for, but yes. So, any other comments on that one? Okay, so I did break out width and depth as a separate item. Just talking about the the channel width and depth. Obviously, the wider it is, it allows for better utilization of the waterway, especially in regards to passing barges. If you've got if you've got a very narrow channel, it becomes somewhat of a safety concern when you've got those large vessels passing each other, and then when you mix recreational vehicle vessels in there as well. So obviously, the wider that any of those channels can be and kept wide, more safe operation it will create. So that one, I guess, Lauren, with your permission, would I put IDNR IDNR on that one? Again, we don't, obviously we don't do the dredging. All we have is, maybe an opinion as to some of this stuff.
Well, I'm kind of splitting here. We talk about the the beneficial use of dredge material, and IDOT has definitely been a
Right.
lead on that. My mind goes to, like you say, it's the Corps doing that under navigational servitude. The challenge comes into finding those dredge disposal sites unless they're doing open water disposal. And that's where the state kind of sponsor needs to step in and help identify those locations on our navigable waterways where we could potentially, stockpile dredge material and or, transform it into beneficial use material.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think from IDOT's perspective, we're more than happy to continue to try to find uses for the benefit of the material. But as far as the actual dredging and promoting of the additional width, um, I don't know how much say we would have in that. I don't know that even IDNR would have a say in that. But also as we start widening out the channel, I don't know if that has any effects on, and I'm not the one expert on this, but would that have any effects on like environmental issues, or is that a concern?
The short answer is yes. I guess I'm trying to figure out how we deal with this in today, right? And who's collaborating, or is it just the Corps kind of out there doing their thing and trying to get land rights, or working with, perhaps whatever portion of the DNR they need to get permits or land rights or permissions. It's kind of fuzzy in my mind how that happens today.
Well, believe me, it's
rather-
fuzzy in my mind too, because I don't think IDOT has any involvement in that, but I certainly, there's so many different, districts and stuff that do their own thing and they don't always, coordinate. A lot of the districts don't even know that we now are more involved in marine transportation. So when stuff like that comes about, they certainly don't reach out to us, but let's,
So maybe the recommendation needs to be to explore and improve that coordination and collaboration on dredging and dredge disposal with the Corps.
okay. And so that would go into number 7. It's essentially the same thing other than just regular maintenance dredging and identifying beneficial uses of that material and continuing to pursue additional funding for those programs. I believe that in a lot of the areas that the dredging operations are, I guess I'd say insufficient as we get a lot of high water and we get a lot of movement of the sandbars and all that kind of stuff. I guess more funding is always allows them to do more dredging, which is a good thing. I did see and maybe this has nothing to do with this,
BJ, I
but
have a couple questions.
okay.
Sorry. Number 6, we've had conversation about, but when I read this, I'm not really even sure what this means. So you might need to look back at this recommendation based on this conversation, because when you just say can support their program, these recommendations have to be somewhat specific so that we can check back in 5 years and figure and see if we did what we said we'd do. Support's a little vague. So I'm not, even after this conversation, I'm not sure what you mean by this. And but then my other question is, if you want to pursue additional funding, shouldn't we be putting funding in these?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
and the reason I guess, and maybe, I don't know if the width and depth, I was separating that from regular routine maintenance dredging. And the reason was that if you go back and look at page 4, talking about the width of the channel must be sufficient to allow, 2 barge tows to pass safely. And then on the Illinois River, Ohio River, Mississippi River, south of St. Louis, the channel width is approximately 300 feet. The width of the channel in the Mississippi north of St. Louis varies from 200 to 400. And then as you get into the artificial channels, they have much narrow widths. And says, for example, the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Channel is only 160 feet wide. So I guess the only reason for including that as a separate section was that it was really dealt with and it had to do more with safe passage than it did with the really the depth and the regular maintenance dredging. Does that make sense at all, or is it still?
So would
It
number
makes sense, but you need to say what you mean. Maybe when you say support it, I'm just looking for more clear definition of how and who's supporting and doing what.
Okay.
maybe it's promote. The state of Illinois should promote the Corps to maintain adequate width and depth to facilitate, passing barges or something.
Yeah, I mean, where I struggled was, you do like several paragraphs in each of these sections, and then trying to take that and put it into the recommendations. Where I guess maybe I did too much just cutting and pasting and not providing an actual more specific recommendation. So, and we'll jump to maintenance dredging because we kind of talked about that and really just need additional funding to maintain those channels. Environmental concerns. I don't really have a lot of knowledge of that. I just simply said it was marine transportation is a precious natural resource, and the state should approach it in a balanced manner, taking into consideration both environmental and economic ramifications. And obviously listed IDNR as the lead agency. I don't know about funding and legislation. But again, always more money seems to help many of these different programs. Any thoughts on that?
I guess my mind goes to the NESP, the federal NESP program. Do we need to financially support or promote a continuation of that program to address the environmental concerns related with to offset or in conjunction with navigation improvements? I'm also, I guess, challenged as I begin to think about that, about how this new legislation, this pending legislation that's out there right now that basically creates a Mississippi Restoration Initiative funding, similar to the GLRI funding we were just talking about on Lake Michigan. So there's legislation out there that would create Mississippi River funding, in the millions of dollars. And I'm trying to think how that should be considered, I guess, in this plan for accomplishing things like environmental improvements or even back on the widths of the channel. Could we specifically get, $100 million to do, widen the navigation channel from point A to point B or something? That's where my mind starts going as I get into some of those thoughts.
Right, right. And I don't know if I sent you that article and talked a little bit about, how an additional 4 feet of draft would provide X amount of tonnage, which meant a whole lot more additional money for farmers. I don't know if you read that or not, but
I did. Yeah, I did. Thank you.
but anyway, so yeah, so I mean, there's obviously a limit to how deep you can go based on funding and such, but the deeper and wider is obviously better for navigation, but not so maybe good for um, other impacts. And I didn't go into obviously the Brandon Road and its impacts on navigation and how how environmental and navigation sometimes have conflicting benefits or issues. So that's really all I had. I just copied in the one from public education improvements that I think everybody was to include. If I was understanding that right, include that in each one of the different sections.
Okay, we'll just go ahead and open it up. Does anybody have any general comments or questions for BJ on the navigation section? I'll pause and see if anybody has any comments.
It's not. I did want to mention also. Somebody had mentioned about the cruises maybe coming into the. There's lakefront in Chicago, but there are currently cruise line that comes into the Iroquois Landing there at Illinois International Port District as well, on not on a regular basis, but it does in fact dock there, and then they bus people into the city.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most scenic place to dock.
No, no, not at all, not at all.
And I believe there are communities, North Shore communities that are interested in developing, docks and ports just for that industry. Come right into our, get off the boat walk right into our downtown and spend lots of money.
Right.
Hey, BJ, we did get a question here from Brian Cox. Is there a need to address underwater crossing of pipelines, sanitary sewers, public water supplies? Pipelines have received a lot of press specifically in or near bodies of water. Is there any need to address that? You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, it has become more prevalent now that, you know, it's a oil spill and attributing that to an anchor. Yeah, I guess I don't know much about it in the, you know, on the Illinois River and the Mississippi River and some of the other, but yeah, let me make a note here that look into that, and maybe that's something I need to add.
Well, I guess, Brian, do you want to kind of speak to this? Is there a recommendation you had in mind to consider, or do you want to elaborate any further on this?
Not necessarily a recommendation or anything like that. I just know that, and again, I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of IDPH, so this really doesn't have much of an impact on what we do. I'm just thinking in terms of what the public might ask about. That seems to be something that could be asked about. I know from my time at from IEPA that natural gas pipelines are always a hot topic and are always commented pretty heavily on whenever there's a permit issued for them, and that those pipelines are also bound by Department of Transportation rules. And so that was really the only reason that I was thinking about that was specifically those underwater crossings. Whenever they become an issue, I know they can become an issue for navigation as well. And that tends to be part of the comments that we get is with that regard. So I don't necessarily have a recommendation or even for that matter think that there needs to be anything different because I don't necessarily think that there's a huge issue with it. It was more or less I just wanted to comment on it because I know that we would typically receive a lot of comments whenever we issued permits for those types of pipelines. And also, and that was obviously a national conversation happening not too long ago. So more or less just wanted to call it out.
A couple of comments there, and I think you're right. I think 70% of all the nation's pipelines or somewhere near that percentage cross through the Joliet area of Illinois. But to me, if we have state regulations already in place for pipelines and utility crossings of waterways, you know, for example, it's got to be buried at a minimum of, I think, 3 feet below the existing bed of the river, or it has to be fully encased in concrete or in some way in order to protect that pipeline and prevent those kinds of you know, disruptions or breakages of pipelines that we're hearing about in the news, like on the, you know, in Michigan or the Mackinac Straits or some of that, where an anchor or something could grab a pipeline and drag it or break it. So I think there's existing regulations in Illinois that are set in place to prevent those exact kind of catastrophes. So I'm struggling to think of what recommendation we would put in there that would advance or in somehow modify or change those existing regulations for the better. Thank you.
Laura, do you know where those regulations exist?
Yeah, they're most of them are in our Part 3700 ad rules, and so they come out of Rivers, Lakes, and Streams Act. And so in many cases, we've issued statewide permits under our existing regulatory program that identify those parameters. And so a utility company, they can go to the, you know, that particular statewide permit, and as long as they abide by, you know, burying it at least 3 feet and having whatever transitions, they don't need any further permitting. Of course, if they have reason to do something special that differs from that, then we get into permitting, but that permitting process is there to avoid those exact kind of disasters you were just mentioning.
Okay. Thank you.
And Lauren, I assume those are all based on like at least on the river's 9-foot draft navigation channel. So if there was some initiative to go deeper, then obviously on those individual circumstances would have to be looked at to see if there was any pipelines or electric lines or anything like that that would be affected.
Exactly.
We had one other comment that Brian had about, I think this goes back to Lake Michigan. I joined late, so I apologize for just the early Lake Michigan thing. I was surprised to not see anything addressing invasive species impacts on commercial fishing. And I think that maybe Brian Metzke maybe covered this some in his section. I see Brian's on. Brian, did you cover this somewhat in aquatic habitat? I think it may have been generally stated statewide and not just specific to Lake Michigan. Brian, are you there to address the invasive species comment?
He just commented on the chat that he doesn't have a microphone today.
All right. Okay. Well, I believe there was. I guess the question would be, would we have something specific to Lake Michigan? And obviously, Brandon Road being a big hot button issue as it pertains to Lake Michigan, and I know zebra mussels is an issue. Lauren, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could recommend that the state of Illinois continue to serve as non-federal sponsor. That's an action that's already underway. So I'm not sure, other than a recommendation to say continue to do that in a way that abides by Illinois public water law. That just kind of reinforces that point. That no matter what we build there, it's got to abide by the public water laws of the state of Illinois that include everything from navigation to aquatic species management. In terms of keeping them out of the Great Lakes, yeah, I'm wondering if Brian Metzke, if that is better in your section in general, or if that should be in a Lake Michigan section, and I can certainly follow up with Brian after to see where it might best be served.
Yeah, Brian, I'm sorry, Lauren, Brian did comment back that he does have comments regarding invasive species in that section. So it may be best just to leave it there as a statewide issue instead of Lake Michigan, unless we have something specific only to Lake Michigan that shouldn't be addressed statewide. But nothing comes to mind on my end regarding that.
Yeah, I can't think of something that we need to suggest as new that isn't already at play.
Okay, very good. I'll continue ask one last time if there's any comments or questions to the navigation section. All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and continue on to the agenda that we had. We were going to discuss the recommendations table. I kind of jumped into that a little bit earlier. I guess we can kind of consider that one covered unless anybody has any further questions on that.
This is Greg Good. I do have a question on the issue paper's structure. And I don't know if that's on the agenda or not, but today's two presentations And what I had readily at my disposal here, the integrated water management, it's those papers are really structured with an overview section, and then issues and recommendations are under one heading. And each of those three papers, specifically in their upfront discussion, talk about a little bit more detail on, and they correspond directly with what's in those recommendation tables. So there's overview, issues, and recommendations, and more specific writing. Like today, navigation, there was discussion of each one of the issues and recommendations, a lot of text in there, and same thing with Lake Michigan. They followed each other. For like aquatic and riparian habitat, for water sustainability, and at least for our draft water quality section, there's an overview section, then there's an issues section, and then you go into the recommendations tables. The issues sections are somewhat generically written, so that then the tables are structured around those generic issues discussions. For instance, like in Brian Metzke's, he's talking about, he's got an issue about degraded aquatic and riparian habitats, and then has 5 or 6 different recommendations based on that issues discussion. Same thing with our draft water quality one, same thing with the water sustainability one. So I'm wondering if this most recent pattern of, are we wanting to have more specific written out discussion under the issues and a combined issues and recommendations heading, if you will, for each one of the recommendations that are shown in the table? Or is that something we just deal with later, once all the papers are done?
Yeah, I think the format we decide on is that we would have a separate section for issues and recommendations, so those wouldn't be combined. We also alluded to having about 2 to 3 pages of text, and we didn't really specify exactly what was in the recommendations or what was in the issues text. But that's kind of the guidance we gave. I guess we can narrow that down a little bit more, but I would say that we probably want to keep that format we previously discussed about having the separate overview, issues, and recommendations. So essentially those 3 sections. So I think that was just a modification on these, and it may have just been some miscommunication on the formatting we were moving forward with in the report. Now, whether or not we do a deep dive in these write-outs, I don't know. We could talk about that a little bit more in detail if we want. I'm trying to recall. Tara, how many pages is this? We're at 10 pages for this section. So, we were talking about keeping it 2 to 3 and kind of having it a little more concise. And then, if anybody wanted to do a more detailed report similar to the old state water plan, they could do a separate supplemental report. So I think the consensus was this was supposed to be a concise, very direct report that you could hand to a legislator or somebody so they could quickly find the information they're looking for and not get too much in the weeds, but more of kind of providing a very specific, direct language to what we're recommending for the report. That's my understanding, unless somebody else wants to chime in on that. Okay. Well, I guess not. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? General to the report. Okay, we were going to discuss the cross-cutting exhibit a little bit. I think Laura Kiefer was taking a lead on that. I know Tara may have been helping a little bit. Tara, do you want to discuss this at all, or do you want to table it till Laura is able to join us?
I think we'll table it, but I'll just mention that we've talked about it several times, and the idea is when you're developing your own section, you might be thinking internally as to which other topics have similar type of recommendations, and just make a note of it for yourselves so that when we do go to generate these exhibits, it might make it easier for us to understand because there's so many topics, so many recommendations. It would be good to have each topic leader's input as to what they felt was cross-cutting. And right now we talked in the past that we aren't going to show those on the recommendations table, but I'm just asking each leader to internally track it for themselves and then to be ready to share it with the group that develops those cross-cutting exhibits. Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Okay. So it sounds like maybe we'll dive a little bit more into depth on that, maybe get a couple of examples. I know Laura was talking about drafting up an example of what that exhibit may look like, so maybe we'll have something at our next meeting. So the last three items, the review of schedule, next steps, next meeting, and future meetings, or next meeting outline, I'll kind of just all touch at once here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and see if I can just get this pulled up. And hopefully you all can see this. So our next meeting will be November 22nd, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, if I recall correctly, based on everybody's availability and scheduling. So please plan on that accordingly. And I believe Greg Good is on and Laura Kiefer is not, but they are planning to present. Greg, are you guys still good for that?
Yes.
Okay, so that will be the plan for November, and that will be our only meeting. We'll likely see if we can get in another meeting before Christmas. We kind of like to stay away from the last week or even 2 weeks of December, as we know a lot of individuals are out. I might be reaching out to Steve Altman, said he may be available to present in December. And also I saw Gary Bingenheimer was also on. Steve, Gary, do you think that would be, you guys would be available or ready to present at that time? I'm just.
Could you say that again?
I should be able to do it.
Okay, so it was just a question of which topics we would possibly be able to cover, and maybe looking towards the second week of December as our meetings. Our next meeting will be November 22nd, Monday before Thanksgiving, and we're tentatively discussing who would present for a meeting potentially in December, maybe looking at the week of the 3rd, or I'm sorry, the week of the 6th or the 13th is probably the 2 weeks we'll be looking at maybe holding December State Water Plan Task Force. And there we would look at, sounds like Steve is good for December. And I was just seeing if Gary, I thought, was on. He may have had to step off. Actually, I don't see him on here anymore.
This is Michael Wes. This is Michael Woods. We would be ready for the erosion and sedimentation section for IDOA in January as proposed.
Okay, so you guys are good for January.
Yes, once we
Okay.
determine that date, but yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I just wanted to lock down December, and then we'll kind of look at January. I guess
Hey,
I
Wes,
don't.
Chris Davis is on the line and she gave a thumbs up, so it looks to me like she's ready.
Oh,
Yeah.
yep,
and
I
this
do
is
see her in the participation list. Okay, excellent. So we
Yeah.
are good for December. We will have long-term funding, and we will have water use laws and regulations for December. January sounds like we're good for erosion and sediment. I don't see Dave on the call for climate change, but Trent Ford is on. Trent, have you talked to Dave recently, or can you speak anything to the climate change section?
Yeah, I haven't spoken with him about it in a little bit, but I mean, I think you can pencil us in for January and we'll have it ready by that time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Trent. Yeah, just if you could have, or I'll send out an email, Dave, just to confirm, make sure he's aware of that. That's
Yeah,
the plan. But we got
I'll let him know about that, and if for whatever reason he can't make it, I can speak on it as well.
Excellent, excellent. So that would wrap up all of our topics then by January. And then I guess the question would be to the group is, would we be ready to put together a draft report by February then? That may be a little tight crunch for climate change and erosion and sediment, but I guess I'll throw it out the group. When do we think we can have a final draft of your sections? I guess I was proposing maybe sometime in mid-February, which would then allow us to prepare a public outreach, our final public outreach for March, and then address comments, maybe keep that open, public comment section open until April, and then maybe 2 months to address those comments and finalize a report. And this is just something I propose quickly off the hip, so I'm open to comments, thoughts, feedback on this proposed schedule moving forward. So I'll leave it to you all if you have any comments on this. Otherwise, I'm going to assume everybody's happy and ecstatic with this scheduling.
Wes, this is BJ. I'm okay with that date. I guess I just want to make sure that I know what I need to accomplish by then. Obviously make the corrections to the navigation section, but as far as the putting it into the draft report, what format is that going to take? Is that basically just taking the narrative we've got currently and pulling it in there, or are you wanting it to be in a different format? Or
No, BJ, it's essentially just cleaning up your previous submittals, addressing any final comments that were made during this, coordination call, finalizing things with your committee, whatever you want to have in the, well, I'll call the final draft that we will share with the public as our recommendations in our entire section. That would be what we're asking for. So it would essentially be submitting the same thing you submitted to us today, just, a few pages or whatever of your actual section. And then we would compile that into the report, put in all the supplemental information that needs to go into that report, and compile a full, what I'll call final draft of the report in its entirety. And maybe we need to review that internally before we go to public outreach. So maybe we need to push that back a little bit further so that we, as in whoever's compiling that report, can share it with the group as a whole. Because I'm sure that we may have some comments and feedback that we want to address internally before we send it out to the public. Lauren, would you agree with that, that maybe we need a little bit more time between when we receive the draft sections and compiling that draft report before going out to public comment, so we can maybe have a meeting or two just going over the full report internally with the task force?
I think so. So maybe bumping, so instead of 2:15, maybe make that the 3:15. And then a 4:15, 6:15.
So maybe something
Sure.
similar to that, and maybe we'll shoot for a February. I think I'd almost keep this at 2:15 because I think this is when we're asking for those sections from each topic lead. So that's when we'd want that to come into our inbox here at OWR, and then we'll be compiling the report, and then maybe March 3:15 is when we'll do an internal review of the document as part of our maybe a March task force meeting before we hold a public outreach in April.
Yeah. Those would all be 22 at that point too.
It would be, wouldn't it? Oh, man, I'm just glad I'm still putting 21 now this time of year.
Wes, I think this looks good. My only comment to each group would be when you're developing your section, modify per the discussions that we've had in these task force meetings, but also go ahead and add some pictures, figures, graphs, something to, jazz up your section would definitely be appreciated for the readers.
I think to that comment, that's something that we'll want to kind of look at the report as a whole as well to make sure that there's some consistency in that. We don't want one section just a very fully polished with another one that's just plain text and a table. So I think that's why we may need to spend some time. I'm curious as I look at my own deadlines and us compiling this report as a whole, if we are being ambitious, saying that we can take all these sections and turn it around to a final draft in a month. But I guess we'll see how that goes.
We'll know when we have it, I guess.
I guess it just depends on what we get.
I guess building off of Tara's comment to jazz things up, had we talked about having a photo for each section or an illustration?
Well, I think that was the comment Tara just had, was to include something in each section. I think we had mentioned it previously in one of the meetings, but we haven't really given example or anything to that. Tara, your section may have had that whenever you presented. I can't recall. I know mine did not. But we may provide an example if we have a section that thinks they're kind of at that final draft point that they could maybe share as just an example of the group. We'll look at maybe doing that before the January meeting so that we can give everybody a little bit clearer picture on what we're looking for and provide that consistency. Again, we're wanting to make sure this report, while authored by 13 different individuals, that there is some kind of consistency and unity among the sections. So. Is there any other final comments or questions on the proposed timeline we have laid out or the upcoming topics that we're going to be discussing. Again, you can see here on the schedule, November we'll have water quality and data management. December will be long-term funding and water law. And then January we'll wrap up with climate change and erosion and sediment. All right, having none, Lauren, that's all I had. I think that covers everything on the agenda. I will stop sharing. Let Tara share the agenda again if she so wishes, and I'll turn it back to you if you have any closing comments or thoughts.
Well, hey, Wes, this is BJ. I know that I believe Tara made some revisions as she was going through. Will she be able to share those with me? I mean, I made notes, but I know she was writing stuff in there as well. Can I get a copy of the notes that she took as far as the table?
Yes, I will forward you that, but I've also will be generating minutes, and I try to take each recommendation and say what the group is too, and I'll send you those minutes as well. And just to remind everyone, the minutes are always on the website, and they usually take about a week to get up there. But it is also good to look at some of the old minutes as well, just to sort of see what other people have already presented. As a reminder, if you think you might have a cross-cutting, you might go back to see what else somebody said or how they said it.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments, questions, concerns for the good of the cause today? Okay, hearing none, appreciate everybody's engagement today, because it really is, at the end of the day, it's our plan. It's not a DOT plan or an EPA plan or a DNR plan. It's a State Water Plan Task Force plan that we bring forward. So it's really good that we can share and deliberate on each of these topics as the task force. And to me, that's going to make it a stronger document in the end, a stronger plan that we put forward by July of next year. So with that, I thank everybody for their time today. And you can always reach out to Wes or I or Tara with questions about any of the stuff we've covered today or our schedule going forward. So thank you everybody for your time today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.